Hello, and welcome to the Victory Garden. I'm Roger Swain. Fall is a great time to be in the garden and the right time to plant bulbs for spring color. And today, I'll be doing just that. Peter Seabrook will be along with a dazzling story from Holland that's ablaze in spring color. He'll be at the world-famous Keukenhof Gardens and the Hortus Bulborum, a living history museum that chronicles the story of today's modern tulip. And Marion will be here with a recipe that features green tomatoes. That's all just ahead, so please stay tuned.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. And by
NK Lawn and Garden. Seeds, lawn products, gardening books, and products for the young gardener. Helping families grow for over a century.
Helping you grow eyes. Grow Group and your local Grow Eyes centers. Nurseries and garden centers providing for all your yard and garden needs. Grow Eyes.
And Stern's Miracle Grow products, bringing the joy of gardening to generations of Americans.
Just last week, this bed was still planted to annuals, but I've dug them out and added them in the compost heap. And now I'm planting tulips. This is a lily-flowered tulip called Mariette, a lovely, soft, pink flower with pointed, reflexed petals. Annuals followed by spring bulbs is a great combination. It can be a bit bewildering, though, when you go to the garden center, choosing from among all the different kinds of tulips that are available. You have to understand that tulips come in different classes. Some are parrot tulips, Darwins, early Fosterianas, a wide range of blooming times and shapes and heights, short little tulips, some with multiple flowers, some a fantastic 30 inches tall, lovely for cut flowers. The trick is just to look at the pictures and pick the ones that you like. And don't be skimpy. Buy a lot of them and mass them. Now, as for soil preparation, because these tulips already have next year's flower bud in them, you don't have to do a lot of fertilization. If you were going to keep your tulips in the bed for many years, you want to be sure that you had lots of fertility. But general garden fertility is plenty for the first year of bloom. The trick is to plant your tulips deep, a good 6 inches over each bulb. And make sure the soil is well drained. If you have too much moisture down there, the bulb is going to drown. Really, nothing more to it than just sticking them in. As soon as you get them, don't wait until the ground is frozen. You need to let roots form from the bottom of each bulb this fall. You wait too late, and they may not bloom. Well, while I finish planting this bed, why don't you go off to Holland with Peter Seabrook and see where these bulbs came from?
Well, as they say in Dutch, welcome in Holland. We've arrived at the peak of the tourist season with those bulb fields aglow with colour. I'm told that if you want a hotel, the nearest one with a bedroom is 150 miles away. In fact, the only bedroom close by is here. And it creaks and groans a bit in the night, and you may have to get up and move the sails round. But it's such a lovely day. Let's get out into those bulb fields where our story begins. I'm walking on fields 12 feet below the level of the North Sea, just 20 miles or so away, and you can see it's just nothing but sand, 10, 20 feet deep. If you mix a little cow manure with that and add the skill and experience of the Dutch, then you have some of the best bulb-growing land on the planet. And it's little fellas like these grape hyacinths or muscari that you'll see in the garden centre in September. And I'm happy to report there'll be no shortage. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands, billions of them, in this one small field alone. And this, one of the minor bulbs. Next door, we have an example of the miscellaneous. This is one of the ornamental alliums. And I was talking to the breeder earlier today, and he told me that he crossed two different types back in 1959, saw the first flower in 64. By 72 he had enough to show his friends, and in 86 sold the crop to one Japanese who's multiplying them on again and will show them for the first time in Osaka in 1990. And the price, $30 a bulb here. There are millions of them. So that's the minor and the miscellaneous. What about the bread and butter crop for the Dutch industry? Tulips. This variety of tulip is called Attila, presumably after that bloodthirsty Attila the Hun, and to me it is a pretty bloodthirsty colour. And I'm told that there are over 750,000 tulips in this small corner of a field. And come July, one large blade runs under each bed, lifts the tulips, they select out the biggest bulbs for export, and the smallest are replanted again. But the decision to choose this and any other variety is not made lightly. Fashions change. But in an industry with 4 centuries of experience, tracking the trends can mean the difference between success and failure. Well, and now for something entirely different. Instead of huge blocks of a single variety, millions of them, we go to little groups of 25 to 50. And you can come and see them free of charge, but the bulbs are not for sale. It's a museum of tulip varieties, collected first of all by keen amateurs back in 1928, and then taken on by today's growers, because as well as being an example of the history of the tulip here in Holland, it's also an immensely valuable gene bank. If you're a plant breeder today and you want pest and disease resistance that's so important, or perhaps long vase life, taller stems, bigger flowers, well then you can dip back into some of these old original species and use those qualities today. But come on, let's go back about 4 centuries to Turkey and the Suleiman Empire, where they were going out collecting tulips from the wild, hundreds of thousands of them, and cultivating them, I suppose, much as we would today for flower festivals and that kind of thing. And you may dismiss them almost as irrelevant. This one very nearly over, but it gives some indication of the size and type of flower that they were growing. But don't dismiss them today, because these little beautiful rockery type tulips, the true species, were bullet hardy, they flower very early, and they have great garden quality. But so let's go back to our history lesson, because the ambassador from Vienna saw these tulips in Turkey, brought a few back. They were planted in the Botanic Garden in Vienna, and there one Clusius was persecuted for some reason, and he took a few bulbs with him to the Dutch Botanic Garden in Leiden and started to grow them there. And this particular bed, you can't buy it, a very ancient variety, dates back to 1630. And if you're a bit of a skeptic and you're saying to me, how do you know that this is the original variety? Well, then books at the time clearly authenticate it for us. So from these single early tulips from the Turkish and Southeast Asian origins, other single earlies were bred. But you see here the introduction of quite strong reds. Now this is the influence of tulips from Russia and Eastern Europe. It was the red colour particularly that came from that part of the country, and that thread now comes into our story. And now, as well as the Dutch work, the Flemish, what we now call the Belgians, they were busy crossing and breeding new tulips from that Russian and East European stock. So they were looking for long stems, such as we have here, a much squarer shoulder or boxier type of flower, and much later flowering. They were originally called Flemish tulips, and for some inexplicable reason we now refer to them as Darwins. I've never found out the reasons for that. But there are 2 ways of getting these new tulips. We refer to crossing. You get the pollen from the Turkish single early, and you take that onto the Russians, get some seed from that cross, raise the seedlings for 7 years, and then you see the first flower and a new tulip. That's one way. The other way is what we call a mutant or a sport. If you grow thousands and thousands of one kind in a field, occasionally one goes berserk and flowers a different colour, or if you're very lucky, produces a quantity of petals and becomes a double. So let's have a look at some of those doubles. Now, if you had a field of hundreds of thousands of single early tulips and suddenly you came across a plant like this, you could be forgiven for just pulling it up and throwing it away. But fortunately, the grower didn't. He left it, and it developed into this beautiful thing. But it didn't stop there. Bizarre things still happened very occasionally. One twice the size and slightly deeper in colour arose, and somebody spotted that. Then one with variegated foliage, so that you had this bright white edge and green leaves before the flowers. And then all these other colours came. The deep pinks, the yellow and orange, the bicolour pinks, the whites, the plums, the peaches, all of these different colours. And there's an example here that just illustrates what the grower would be looking for. If a petal suddenly changed colour, you'd grab that bulb, grow it, and hopefully the whole flower would change colour in time. So now we have single earlies with multi-petals, and that multi-petal gives you much longer flower life. It's shorter, and it's absolutely perfect for the garden. But the tinkering doesn't stop there. We've got other things to do. The florists, of course, require some different qualities, and we begin to see work to satisfy them here. They're looking for longer stems, long-lasting, but of course they need to be forced to get them into early flowering, and so we see a mix of the Russian and the Turkish in a group called the Mendels, named after that famous botanist. And this is a very early Mendel. It's called Napoleon. You can see that it has a taller stem, but is a bit floppy, and the flower is a little loose. And over the years, that tinkering continues, and we have a variety here. Piquante, which is available, lasts well in water, and because it has that single early flowering characteristic, forces very well. Oh, and there's a lovely variety here that catches our eye today. A number have commented on this. Beautiful subtle shade, Prince Rose. No longer available, I'm afraid, but you can still come here and enjoy it. The plant breeding continues, however, and alongside the Mendels, flowering just a little later, and that stronger Darwin influence, you can see it here, I think, in the group called Triumph. We have that much more boxy-shouldered flower, stiff stem, able to force it, and very long life in water. But now what about the latest introductions? The varieties introduced in the 50s. I well remember the excitement in the 1950s when the first few bulbs of these Darwin hybrids came across from Holland to Britain. We planted about 25 or 50 brown, miserable-looking bulbs in October, and then in the spring, it was as if they would never stop growing. They shot up and up and up and then exploded into these great big scarlet flowers. But as so often happens in life, there was a catch. They had just a touch too much of the single early in them, and only lasted 3 to 5 days in the hot weather, which can occur at that time. I still like to grow a few, set the neighbours alight with those bright colours, but if you want something which will last longer and flower even later, then we need to look at other types. Now we come to the lily-flowered types, which do flower late and do last longer in the heat. Some you can see are in very tight bud, but this first flower illustrates the habit of the species type. It's a variety here that's just a touch earlier than the rest in full flower. Now these will stand high temperature. If you cut, they will last in water. So we've seen the commercial fields. We've been through this museum of flowers. Now let me take you somewhere where the emphasis is on spectacular garden display. Another history lesson, this time 500 years back, and Jacqueline of Hainault, a member of the Dutch aristocracy. And she married at the age of 14 an old French duke, and he died soon after. Then she married a close relative, and the family were most upset. They thought it was close to incest, and insisted that she wrote to the Pope and got an annulment. So then she got involved with a relative of King Henry V of England. Now, once the Duke of Gloucester got married to her, he went off with a lady-in-waiting, taking most of her estates and monies with her. So she gave up men and pursued her interest in falconry, hunting with hawks. And they would come here to the hunting lodge, where they also grew a few herbs. And that gave us the name, Kirkenhof. Kirken meaning kitchen and Hof meaning garden. But I wonder what Jacqueline would think today as the hordes of coaches pour in here from all over Europe to see the bulb growers' spectacular show garden, the Kirkenhof. Now, these remarkable gardens are only open for 12 weeks from March to May. It'll cost you about $6 to get in, and there are 3 good restaurants, a number of places to stop for a cup of coffee, and it'll take you best part of a day to see everything there is here. To begin to understand what's going on here, you need to know that there are 100 growers, all taking one particular area. It's quite a privilege, and there's a waiting list for more to join. And once the designer has given the grower his area and the bed shape, then the grower provides the bulbs, the very best he's got. But he doesn't plant them. That's done by the staff here. The grower then has his nameplate up. This is the firm of Case van der Valk and Son, their warehouse called Sunrise, and they come from Voorhout. He then provides the very best bulbs to fill all of this area. Now, if you were that grower with billions of muscari that we saw in the fields in Limmen just a little while ago, you'd be hoping that a good many customers would make it here to the Kirkenhof and take copious notes on the way that you can plant a veritable river of blue. And then, with a bit of luck, find a few more customers to buy 10 or 20,000 bulbs. Oh, there's a couple of good gardening lessons here to be learned. Do you remember we were looking at those lily-flowered tulips in the bulb museum? Well, here we see them in the right garden setting. The taller varieties put to the back of the bed, tailing down to the shorter in the front. And the way they're planted, the bed itself is serpentine, but each group is nicely curved and flows from one into the other. Mass the colour, yes, but let them flow, not straight block lines. It's in chalets like these that the visitor to the Kirkenhof is parted with his money. Having seen those marvellous beds, you're tempted to buy bulbs to be sent to you next autumn. Perhaps you might want to grow a beautiful collection of tulips like this in your own garden. But what does the breeder and the grower do when they're selecting tulips from the first crosses, which are at least 20 years from the breeding to the first bulbs for sale? I mean, this lovely double late tulip Angelique is in the current fashion of the pastel shades, and equally new design with that cream-edged variegation to the leaf. Somebody there foresaw the trend all right. And today's modern clothes fashion colours of these muted mauves, here the blue heron, the frosted tulip, right bang up to date in fashion terms, and then this lovely apricot shades of Menton. But who knows what the gardeners in the 21st century will want. If you come into this show greenhouse to make a selection from the living catalogue of tulip varieties, they don't tell you that you need to know that the flower colours will be just a little softer and more muted, and the flower size half as big again. And there are some remarkable things. Look at this, one of the viridifloras, or the green-flowered tulips, with the centre of those petals quite rich green. This is one called Golden Artist. And then next door, the most outrageous thing of all. I've heard people here saying it should be called Pit Bull Terrier or Chernobyl. In practice, it's Rococo, one of the really bizarre parrot or twisted tulips. But here's a variety, I think, which almost laughs at you. Absolutely rich, peppermint and white, the variety called Ice Follies. Now, there's a lovely thing to see in your conservatory early spring. Well, that's our postcard from Holland. If you can, just once in a lifetime, come here in the spring and see those most spectacular of bulb fields. And then take a day to come on here to the Keukenhof Gardens. Without question, the most beautiful bulb garden in the world.
There's no arguing with that conclusion, Peter. Now, here at the suburban garden a couple nights ago, all the conditions were right for frost. Absolutely clear sky, not a breath of wind, radiative cooling, and the temperatures plummeted. Came out here in the morning and I started looking for damage. Cucumbers, eggplants, they're the first things to go, but nothing is more susceptible than basil, extraordinarily tender. And the ice has blackened the tops of these plants, not farther down, but just the tops. Now, the first frost of the season is only a shot across our boughs. It doesn't take out everything. The beans are fine. The cool crops, like Swiss chard, why, they positively love these conditions. Isn't that lovely under there? The tomatoes, they don't like frost. And you can see a little bit of blackening here. But typically we have several weeks of fair, warm weather after the first cold snap, and most of these fruits will ripen up just fine. But right now, I'm in search of some green tomatoes. Green tomatoes are a delicious vegetable in their own right. Now here are some nice big ones, and let's see Chef Marion demonstrate how wonderful they can be.
Fried green tomatoes. Now that's an old-fashioned recipe and a popular book and movie. But frankly, I prefer my green tomatoes grilled or broiled. And to do that, I replaced the frying batter with a mustard marinade. And I got that idea from Nana's Mustard Pickle, where she brined green tomatoes in a mustard sauce. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. First of all, the green tomatoes. All you have to do is to remove the core, and then I cut a little slice on the end so the slices will lie flat, and then cut great big 1/2 inch slices. This one's a little pink in the middle. That's pretty. And then they go into a flat dish so I can put some marinade on them. That's 4 green tomatoes. Now for the marinade. I have 2 tablespoons of Dijon-style mustard. I think the mustard helps to tenderize the kind of tough green tomatoes. And into that, I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. That's a vinegar that has a certain sweetness to it, which nicely counterbalances the tartness of the tomatoes. And then a little bit of olive oil. That's about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That'll help keep the tomatoes from sticking to the grill or the broiler rack. And then some fresh oregano. I'm going to put in about a tablespoon and a half of fresh oregano. That's a lovely flavor. Now this just gets poured all over the tomatoes. This is kind of a sloppy procedure, but it really works. I'm going to turn the tomatoes until they're all coated with the marinade, just like this. There. Now I'm going to let these marinate at room temperature for about an hour, and then I'm going to put them on the grill. But right now, of course, it's raining quite hard, so if it doesn't stop, I'll put them under the broiler instead. To heck with the rain, I'm grilling anyway. Here I've put a little chicken on with my tomatoes, and I've been cooking these for about 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn them all and cook them for 3 or 4 minutes longer, and then we'll be able to sit down to dinner. Grilled green tomatoes help to make a simple, super supper.
That's a tasty combination, Marion. Mustard and green tomatoes. Well, over in this part of the woodland garden at this time of the year, the real pleasure is the blossoms of this autumn flowering clematis. Small star-like flowers spilling out over this granite stone wall. But let's not neglect the other senses. And there's a lovely fragrance in the air. The sweetest odor, and it's coming from this Cymicifuga. It's a variety called the brunette, distinguished for its deep purplish foliage, but its real pleasure is the scent of the blossoms. truly the most fragrant of all of the Simicificus, and let's make it the plant of the week. Well, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll tune in next week when Peter Seabrook visits the apple collection of the Royal Horticultural Society's garden, Wisley. Until then, this is Roger Swain, hoping you have a great week in your victory garden.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. And by
NK Lawn and Garden. Seeds, lawn products, gardening books, and products for the young gardener. Helping families grow for over a century.
Helping you grow eyes. Grow Group and your local Grow Eyes centers. Nurseries and garden centers providing for all your yard and garden needs. Grow Eyes.
and Stern's Miracle Grow products, bringing the joy of gardening to generations of Americans.
Tonight on the Saturday Movie Feature, enjoy a humorous and bittersweet look at growing old. Watch Ending Up tonight at 11 on Nebraska Public Television.
A production of WGBH, Boston.
The Victory Garden Plant List is an annotated guide to the 400 plants in the Victory Garden which grow throughout North America. To order, send $7 to the Victory Garden Plant List, Box 2222, Southeastern Mass, 02375.
This is PBS.
The Victory Garden is provided in part by Hillis's, complete floral design, culinary market, and customized full-service catering.